hit the button. Now we're recording. To everyone listening to this recording, thank you so much for being a student here at our Bible study. We are looking at the fourth in our series of the story, and it's called simply Deliverance. I'm Paul McLeod, the Minister of Education here at Mount Calvary Baptist Church. Thank you so much for joining us. To everyone, our live students here and anybody looking at the recording, last week we saw how God can work through difficult circumstances to bring about good. And we see that in the story of Joseph. And as I alluded to just a minute ago with our live students, this week we're going to see how the story of the Israelites' deliverance demonstrates how God provides for and protects his people. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. Now, we're also going to continue in our memorization work, of movement one of the story. If you remember, you can see it on your screens here. There are 5 movements of the story. There's the story of the garden, which parallels the written accounts in Genesis 1 through 11. There's the story of Israel, and that's accounted for in the Bible in Genesis 12 all the way to the end of the Old Testament, the last book being Malachi. The story of Jesus, a set of 4 books in the New Testament at the very beginning that we call the Gospels. Actually, there's one gospel, but there are 4 accounts: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The story of the church in Acts, all the way almost to the end of the New Testament, all from Acts all the way to Jude, is the story of the church. And then lastly, the story of the new garden. That's in the book of Revelation. And by the way, I think I mentioned this last week, there's only one Revelation. It's not Revelations, it's not the book of Revelations, it's Revelation. And so we want to have in our minds, in our hearts, this is a good way to understand the story and to understand how the story is composed of movements, almost like a story or a drama or something like that. And so we have key words that we're memorizing, and we're doing that by repetition. There's garden, Israel, Jesus, church, and new garden. If you say that several times a day and practice with us during these Bible study sessions, over time, you're just going to learn them. Your brain is going to say, oh yeah, I remember, I know that, I recognize that. And it's the miracle of repetition is amazing. So let's say all together, and whether you're muted or unmuted, either way, let's say all together twice the 5 movements of the story using the keywords that you see on your screen. So here we go. Garden, Israel,
and new garden.
Very good. One more time. Here we go. Garden,
Israel, new garden.
Right. That's great. Last Sunday, one of the deacons at the door who checks temperatures, I'm not going to use any names, before he took my temperature, he said, garden. And I froze. I looked at him like he was crazy, and I had no idea what he was talking about. And then he said, garden. And then I said, oh yeah, I got this. I know this. Garden, Israel, Jesus, church, new garden. And he let me in. Took my temperature and then he let me in. So as you have conversations with each other, you call each other, maybe see each other during the week, you can quiz each other. Hopefully you won't freeze like I did. So, all right. So next, let's take a look at the actual movement one.
Wait a minute.
Yes.
Wait a minute.
Yes.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Just wait a minute.
Yes.
Hold on. Whoa.
Are you copying this down? I don't know.
Who's that?
Everything okay? Can I go to the next slide? Okay, I hope everything is all right. All right, may not have been us. Okay, Lord help. All right, movement one. Movement one of the story. And if you notice, each week there are more blanks to fill in. And that's another technique of helping your brain recognize and grab hold of these words. So what we're going to do is twice, we are going to go through movement one. Now you'll notice that there's a lag. There's a delay because of the signals and the electricity going through and the audio and all that kind of stuff. What I do is I just ignore the delay and I just go along with what I hear and just keep it going. And with some practice, I've learned to kind of tune out the delay. So I'm hoping that whether you're muted or not muted, you can go ahead and read it with us and it'll just help you in your memory. All right, so here goes movement one of the story all together. Here we go. In the upper
story, God creates the lower story.
His
Vision is to come down, be with us,
First two beautiful God.
reject God's
The
vision.
first two people reject God's
and are
vision
escorted
and are
from
Their decision
paradise.
introduces
Yeah.
sin
Their
into
decision
human race,
decision introduces
us
sin
from community with
Right.
God.
To the human race
keeps us
and keep
from
us
God.
in community with God.
At this
At
moment,
this moment.
God
God
gives
gives
God
a
gives a
and
promise
launches a
plan
plan
to
get us back.
get us
The
back.
rest of the
The
Bible
rest
of the Bible
is
is
God's
God's
story.
story
How
story
he kept
how
of how he kept
that
that
promise.
made
promise
it possible
and made it
in
possible
the
for us to
relationship
enter
a
a loving
loving
relationship
relationship
with
with
Him.
him.
Wonderful. I hear some voices there, and if you're on mute, that's fine. I hope you're going along with us. Oh, that's great. That's wonderful. One more time. Here we go. In the upper
The upper story,
God
creates the
God
lower
creates the lower story.
His vision
His
is
vision is to come down
down
and be with us
with
in a
us
beautiful
in a
garden.
beautiful garden.
garden.
first two
The
people
first two people
First two
that God's
people
vision
that God's
escorted
vision
And are
paradise.
escorted
and are
from
escorted
paradise.
from
introduces
paradise.
sin
Their
into
decision
The
introduces
decision
sin into
introduces
the
community
human
with God.
into the
Right.
human
At
race
this moment,
us
God gives us
community.
from community
a
with
plan to
God.
get us back.
At this
At
moment,
this
Rest
moment,
This
God
moment,
gives
God
God's
gives
story
us
of how he kept
promise
that
launches
promise.
a
launches
plan.
a
Made it
plan
possible
to
to
get
us
us
in a
back.
loving
the
relationship.
rest of the
Rest of
Bible,
the Bible
is God's
God's
story
story
of how
of how he
kept that
kept
promise
that promise
and
A
made
loving
it
relationship
possible
with him.
for
for
us
us
to enter
to
a
enter
loving
a loving
relationship
relationship
with Him.
with him.
Wow, great. That is wonderful. Well, I really pray that week by week that's getting easier for you, and that you start to recognize the words. And eventually, we'll do this for a few more weeks, but eventually, we won't get to the point where you can say that, not necessarily word for word, maybe, but pretty much the content in your own words, at least. So hopefully, that will, by repetition, you'll be able to do that. All right, let's grab our study guides. And I have, let's take a look at one of the questions in the study guides. I'm really curious about your personal time, your personal reading, and your personal time this week, and how you did. So let's turn to page 44 in your study guide, the smaller book. And on page 44, you see that it says group time at the very top. And there's a section there that says know the story. And the number one question that I'm curious about. No, I'm sorry, number two. Number two says, what was your most interesting insight or question from your personal time this week? So let's take a few minutes, and I want you to just jot down a few notes. You don't have to write a whole paragraph or anything like that. If you're trying to remember, if you actually went through your, oh, nope, that is in, did I do the right one? Nope.
Yeah.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. That is right. Okay. I'm getting my weeks mixed up. Yes, that is page 44. If you need to jog your memory, then if you go to, let's see, for last week, yeah, page 34, there was a question there on page 34. It says, did you have a new discovery from your reading and study this week? If so, what is it? If you put something in those blanks, if you went through your personal time and you jotted down something, then you can write pretty much the same thing on page 44. That'll probably jog your memory. So take a look. I'll give you a few minutes. Take a look at page 44 and go ahead and answer question number 1.
I thought you said question number 2.
For number 2.
Question number 2.
Question number 2.
Somebody's listening. Yes, question number 2 on page 44. I'm sorry. I've got that number 1 circled and my eyes keep going to it. So it is, yes, it is number 2 on page 44. Thank you. All right, I've just prompted everybody to take yourself off of mute. If you have, let's hear from maybe 2 or 3 people and share what you've written down there. What was your most interesting insight or question from your personal time this past week? Who has the first comment or question?
I'll ask.
All right, Rodney.
I'm just wondering why it doesn't matter how often God will show up and fix situations for us. It seems like it's never enough. We're always looking for the next thing he can do for us, even though he just pulled us out of a situation just like the Israelites. Seemed like he'd do one thing for them and then maybe something else doesn't seem right, so they complain about that, and he'll fix that, and then something else, they'll complain about something else, and that's no different than the way we do today, it seems like.
You notice a similarity, huh?
Well, I speak for me, you know. I mean, I guess I don't need to speak for everybody else. But, I find myself sometimes the Lord will pull me through one thing, and then next thing I know, I haven't even I probably haven't thanked him enough for what he's already done. I'm looking for what else he's gonna do. So.
Yeah, there is a similarity between the people of Israel and their behavior collectively as a people, and our behavior, even collectively as a church, and maybe even individually. There are some similarities there. Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned,
why is that, Paul?
Go ahead.
Why is that?
Oh, that is a question.
Yeah.
Why is that? Well, it really goes back to the beginning. It really goes back to what we call original sin. It goes back to not having that that relationship with God unhindered by that thing that we call that's called sin. We're needy, we're broken.
And having and seeing that God vision that he had given us initially.
Right. Exactly. Does that kind of make sense, Rodney?
Yes, it does, from both of y'all. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's good that you saw that similarity, because I'm convinced that the Holy Spirit led the writer of this part of the story intentionally made that clear through that parallelism, through those similarities. Okay. Who else has an interesting insight or question, something that maybe just really hit you this past week?
I had one. What would have happened if God did not harden Pharaoh's heart?
I can say definitively, without hesitation, that I have no idea. I can say that with 100% confidence and guarantee, and I will probably not have to retract that.
Right, because
As a storyteller,
I was going to say, in the story that he did finally let the people go, and he also told Moses to bless him before he left. So why did God decide to harden his heart? I wonder what would have happened if he had not hardened his heart and he just let the people go. But my husband was telling me he probably would have turned around and went back and got him anyway.
I feel like he knew his personality. He knew his inward thoughts, and he knew he was going to change his mind anyway.
Yeah, knowing the leaning of Pharaoh's heart. I mean, God is all knowing. He knows the thoughts of our heart. He knows things before we even say it. Knowing Pharaoh's disposition and how he is, been dealing with him ever since he was born. Knowing how he is, God, I think would like it. It was probably the case where, yeah, he probably regretted anyway. But we don't know. But it is interesting that God hardened his heart as part of his judgment. If you notice in this part of the Old Testament, well, I don't want to say just this part, but God is all loving. He loves us. There's mercy, there's grace. I mean, there's just endless love that God has for us. But the other side of the coin is that God is a just judge also. He's just because he knows everything. He sees everything. He's all powerful. And so when he decides to judge, he has what we call sovereignty. He has the authority, the right to judge. And that was part of Pharaoh and the Egyptians' judgment, is that he hardened his heart to move this part of the story forward, that he would be rebellious and then finally let them go and then go after them. So we see part of God's judgment also.
what if we looked at that from Moses' perspective? After all, Moses at the beginning was like, God, I don't want to do this task because I'm not very eloquent, and I'm not sure if I can do this task. So if Pharaoh's heart was not hardened and he easily let them go, what if in the middle of their journey they started complaining and Moses just gave up and said, I didn't even want to bring you guys anyhow? So with the hardening of Pharaoh's heart and the challenges that Moses had to face each time, gave him the strength, I think, to face any challenge that would have arisen on the journey, and any capacity to see that God was with him each turn of the road.
Okay.
So he wouldn't easily have given up.
Right. So what you're saying is that God may have made it a little harder so that he could get the glory.
Yeah, at the
Moses
beginning.
see
So
that, wow.
Moses would know that with each difficulty, you turn to God to find out the truth and the answer.
And that the last time he hardened his heart, he actually said that he was going to use Pharaoh and his army to let the Egyptians know that he was Lord, you know. So he actually was doing that last hardening, I guess, where they was going to be swept up in the sea. He was still doing that to show that he was Lord, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And if we look at the Bible overall, and this is good to keep in mind as we go forward and we look at the story, we're not always told why God does something. He does things. He's the main character. I think we realize that by now. You know, we're not the main character. Moses is not the main character, but God is the main character of the story. And sometimes the narrative, or even God, or something indicates why he does something, and sometimes it doesn't, and we don't know. So I think if we focus on those parts of the story and Revelation where we know for sure why God does something, it ought to stand out, because it's like, wait, hold it. God is telling us something about his character, about our character, about the devil's character. He's indicating something about why he's showing us what he's doing and telling us why he's doing it. And if he doesn't tell us why he's doing it, then praise the Lord, he's still God.
No, did you know?
Yeah. Okay.
The thing that stood out to me was, and I was wondering why God took the children of Israel through all the plagues and hardships and things. I was wondering if it were to test them, to see how they trusted God and believed that who he was, and that what he was doing was to show who he was to them and to Pharaoh and his army. I think it was twofold. It was for both, the benefit of both. The children of Israel had to trust God to get them to where he said he was going to send them and provide for them. It was also to show Pharaoh who God was, and that he could get the children of Israel to the promised land. So I think it was twofold. It was for both the children of Israel and for Pharaoh and his people.
Now, one thing you said, Mary, is, if I'm remembering correctly, the children of Israel may not have experienced all the plagues along with the Egyptians. We know, of course, that the Passover provided an exemption.
Yeah.
Okay,
But they witnessed, they witnessed that. They knew that was taking place, but the Passover excluded them from that. Yeah, no.
Right. And then there was another plague, if I remember correctly. I think it was the plague of darkness. As part of one of the plagues, there was darkness over the land. And I believe the Bible talks about, except for the Israelites, the darkness that come upon the Egyptians, but not on the Israelites. And if we study all the other plagues, it's not clear whether the Israelites went through all those other ones with them or not. It's not quite, the narrative is not quite clear. But yeah, you're right, Mary, as far as showing and demonstrating, that's really the main point that God wanted to put across. He was basically saying, look, I'm God and you're not.
Yes.
You really want to sum up the message that God was sending, is that, look, I'm all powerful. I'm more powerful than gods. Each plague had a counterpart in the Egyptian realm of gods. And so he was coming up against those gods and showing his power. So yeah, that was a demonstration, definitely. Yeah. All right. Very good. Thank you. It's very interesting to hear your insights and your questions. I'm going to go ahead and get the video together. You'll see on your screen that it's black. let me just say a couple words before I show the video. Randy Frazee does a really good job of recapping, of reviewing what's going on, and some insights that we should pick out of this. The narration in the very beginning is a young lady that apparently she has some type of disability. And so her speech is not the clearest, and I can tell that she is putting a lot of effort into her speech. You may want to turn up your device a little more than usual so that you can hear her and pay attention to her words. It's not completely garbled or anything like that, but you may want to turn up your volume just a little more. So here we go. And I'll go ahead and put everybody on mute so that we have a good audio experience.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is your story. This is my story. But most of all, this is the greatest story ever told. This is God's story. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro's father-in-law, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Hiram, the mountain of God. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight. When the Lord saw that he has gone over, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of the people in Egypt. I am concerned about their suffering, so I have come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians, and to bring them out of the land into good and spacious land flowing with milk and honey. So now go, I am sending you to the Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you.
At the opening of chapter 3 of the story, something has gone terribly wrong. The nation of Israel, that people that God is going to use to bring us a solution that will allow us all to come back into a relationship with God, finds themselves in deep trouble. They have grown massively from the 70 who arrived in Egypt with Jacob under Joseph's leadership. But out of fear that these Hebrew people were getting too large and might take over, Pharaoh decides to make them all slaves, to build his mighty pyramids in his kingdom. It appears that Pharaoh is controlling the world of the Israelites. What happened to God's upper story plan? Did this take God by surprise? Not at all. 565 years earlier, God told Abraham that this was going to happen. Listen to what he said to Abraham all the way back in chapter 2. Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years as slaves. In the lower story, it looked like Pharaoh was controlling the world, but not for a moment. The time had come for God to deliver Israel and restore them on the path towards his promise to them. It's time to once again reveal his name, his power, and his plan. He just needs to find the right point person. Well, Moses is out in the wilderness minding his own business, tending to his father-in-law's sheep, good lower story living. And out of nowhere, he is visited by God through a talking burning bush who has an upper story proposal for him. God wants Moses to head into the metropolis of Egypt and stand in front of the mighty Pharaoh and give a speech which essentially tells Pharaoh to let the Hebrew people go, his free slave labor force. Now, Moses is overwhelmed and doesn't feel qualified, and he musters up the courage to respectfully decline. O Lord, I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. O Lord, please send someone else to do it. Now, before we get too hard on our buddy Moses, let's consider the facts. Fact number one, people fear public speaking more than dying. It is terrifying for most people to stand in front of a group of people and speak, let alone to the Pharaoh of Egypt who thinks he's a god and doesn't particularly like you. Fact number two, to my knowledge, Toastmasters doesn't have a chapter in the middle of the Midian desert. Tending sheep isn't exactly fertile soil to hone in on your verbal skills. But that's not all. Moses has a shaky past with Egypt. He burned some bridges that would make him a poor candidate to deliver this message. You may recall from your reading that when Moses was a baby, he was spared Pharaoh's death edict on all firstborn males. He was thrown into a river and rescued and adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. He was raised in Pharaoh's palace as royalty. Not a bad series of lucky breaks. However, one day after Moses became a man, he saw an Egyptian soldier beating and abusing a Hebrew slave. And out of anger, he killed the Egyptian and then fled to the country for his life. If he stepped foot back in Egypt, he would be killed before he got the first word of the Lord out of his mouth. I've just convinced myself that Moses is in fact a horrible choice. In the lower story, I side with Moses. He has made a great case. But God sees it differently. In the lower story, Moses isn't qualified for such an important task. But in the upper story, God sees Moses' weakness as the best channel for God's strength. When Israel is successful in being freed from the Egyptian oppression, everyone will see God. As with our lives, the best thing we can do, even when we don't feel equipped or adequate, is to simply say yes to God. And he does. Moses makes his way to Egypt. Now, how does Moses reveal God's name? Whenever the Israelites who haven't heard from God in 400 years ask Moses, "Who sent you?" God instructed Moses to answer this way: "I am who I am." That is what you are to say to the Israelites. "I am has sent me to you." Now in Hebrew, I am is pronounced Yahweh. This name for God, Yahweh or Jehovah, implies that God is the self-existent one who always was, always is, and always will be the faithful and dependable God who calls himself I am. Moses is in essence saying, everything you are about to see and experienced is sponsored by Yahweh. Now, I don't know about you, but that sends chills up and down my spine. How does God reveal his power through Moses? Well, he's going to do it through the unleashing of the famous 10 plagues. The plagues unfold one at a time. And it's interesting to note that several times Pharaoh is so overwhelmed by the impact of these mighty displays of power that he agrees to let the people go. But the Bible tells us that God hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he would change his mind. God wants to make sure he gets to that last plague because in it is a major clue on his plan to get us all back. Now who's in charge of the world? I love how Paul puts it in the New Testament book of Romans. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, "I raised you up for this very purpose, that I might display my power in you and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. Therefore God has mercy on whom he wants to have mercy, and he hardens whom he wants to harden. It is in the 10th plague that God reveals his plan. God tells Moses on one night, his angel is going to come through the entire kingdom of Egypt and kill every firstborn male. However, this angel of death will pass over any home that has the blood of an unblemished lamb brushed across the doorframe. On that fateful night, all the firstborn sons of Egypt, including Pharaoh's son, die. Only the Hebrew sons are saved because of the blood of the lamb applied to the doorpost. Ironically, the edict that Pharaoh unleashed on the Hebrews' firstborn sons has been reversed and unleashed on his people. And Pharaoh says, "Go." Now, God chooses to allow his heart to stay softened just long enough for Israel to begin their trek toward the Red Sea. Some suggest that somewhere around 1 to 3 million Israelites start the victorious march out of Egypt that day. There's a major clue to God's plan within this famous event that is still celebrated amongst Jews today, called the Passover. The way in which we will be saved from eternal death will require the blood of an unblemished lamb to be placed over the doorpost of our lives. Keep this in mind as we continue our journey through the rest of the story. Now, some of you may feel you have a Pharaoh in your life right now. It might be a person, it might be a circumstance. It looks like this Pharaoh is completely in charge over your life. Just remember, in the lower story, this is how it may appear, but none of this has taken God by surprise in the upper story. God is completely in charge and in control. And know that if you love him and align your life to his upper story plan, he promises that everything is going to work out for the good. One way or another, you too will cross over the Red Sea. Find peace in that, my brothers and sisters.
All right, very good, very good. Well, let's discuss this. The video was meant to be both encouraging and challenging. In fact, on page 45 of your study guide, there's a question about that. I'm going to go ahead and ask all to unmute. You can go ahead and take yourselves off of mute, but I'm interested in that first question. What part of Randy's teaching encouraged or challenged you the most, and why? Were you encouraged? Were you challenged? Were you both? And why? So go ahead and pipe up and let me hear what you have to say.
It was the last part of what he was saying. So I was trying to write it down. He says in the lower story, it seemed like the enemy has the upper hand. But in the upper story, God is in complete control over everything. And although things look bad, like you're going down, God is actually plan is going forward. I didn't get all of what he said, but I like that part. It was encouraging.
Okay, that was encouraging to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I can see that.
What I found challenging when Moses said that he was slow in speech and in tongues, and for God to come to him and task him with his great responsibility, first access. He was a wanted man over in Egypt. And Moses had some of the best education that you could receive while he was in Egypt. But yet at the same time, he had a speech impediment. He probably stuttered, you know. That's what I found challenging.
Okay. Why do you find that challenging?
Well, just like I said, he had basically some of the best education, and you know he was taught in areas that was he became expert in, as far as, like architecture, math, and especially in speech, he was taught what the royals were taught. Yet at the same time, when God told him that he wanted him to go to Pharaoh and tell him to let his people go, he said, I can't come. And then done. That was kind of challenging. But I know God said that he's going to send his brother Aaron with him. His brother Aaron.
Right. Okay. All right. Someone else, encouraging or challenging?
Well, I find that it's a little of both, but I want to, if you guys will bear with me a little bit, the last part of what Mr. Randy said resonated with me based on some of the things that I discovered through this particular part of scripture. Is what are the pharaohs in your life? What is oppressing you? And so if we look at Moses and what he represented, he was a Hebrew when he was born, but he was immersed in the Egyptian culture. And so I look at what's happening today. Culture influences a lot of what we do. And so I see happening because Moses had an identity crisis. He went through a process of being a Hebrew, but he was immersed in the Egyptian culture. He learned, he learned all what they did. And you got to realize that the Hebrews stood for a monotheistic theistic type of worship, one God, where Egyptians were polytheistic. They worship more than one God. So there was a conflict already emerging in him, trying to figure out where he belonged. So he was sort of straddling the fence. And so if you look at, unfortunately, because he was straddling the fence and then he sort of tried to execute, I want to be on the Hebrew side of things, the way he went about it, it basically ostracized him from both sides. And so if you look at our culture, we have this cancel culture now, we have all these things happening. Look at how our young people are being so greatly influenced about what's happening in the culture today, even though they may be raised in church. And so I see a lot of the pharaohs and that's happening now that are oppressing our young people is coming from the culture that is being pushed out here. To me, the church is not shouting or really giving the loudest influence. I think the world is influencing a lot more in some ways. So I think that for me is identifying those pharaohs that are oppressing, that are doing creating things that our folks are looking at more and are whining and crying about instead of standing up because they know a God that can help them.
Okay. Okay, so you saw it from a kind of a cultural aspect and a conflict of cultures. Okay. All right. One more comment or one more comment about encouraging or challenging or what and why.
Well, I saw it as both as well. When Randy said that we're still going to have our pharaohs, that's a challenge. We're always going to have problems. But then the encouraging part was that God's plan, or we're going to be okay. But because we're human, even though we may believe that, we still worry about what these pharaohs are and what our challenges are. So, I do believe that God's going to take care of me, but let me help him a little bit.
That's true. That's true.
I mean, that's just the human side of it.
Yeah. How that works out.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's some good comments. As I was thinking about that particular question, for me, it was also both. It was encouraging and challenging. The most challenging part of it for me, and I apologize that I didn't point it out, but you have some blanks you could have filled in starting at the bottom of page 44 of your study guide to take notes. The answers are at the end of the session, but that third bullet at the bottom of page 44, I found to be the most challenging personally. It says the best thing we can do is say yes to God. I'm not gonna blow smoke and say that that 100% of the time I say yes to God. To me, that's a challenge. It's a challenge to my trust. It's a challenge to my dependence, and my spiritual maturity, my relationship with God. So I found that very challenging. But I also was very encouraged, especially with the last part, when God pulled back the curtains just a little and gave us a foreshadow of how this problem is going to be solved. If you remember back when we messed up in Adam and rebelled, and part of the cursings and all this kind of stuff, and God was talking to the snake, the serpent, and saying, you're going to crawl on your belly, you're going to eat dust. He said something very interesting to the serpent, saying, hey, you're going to have enmity or hostility between you and the seed of woman. You're going to hate each other. You're going to be enemies. And he, talking about the seed of the woman, is going to bruise your head, and you're going to nip at his heel. So that's basically a foreshadowing, and we had a discussion about that. It was a foreshadowing of Jesus crushing the head of Satan and death. And so God pulled back the curtain, let us see just a glimpse of what's coming down the line. And we see the same thing in Israelites' deliverance of Egypt. He pulls back the curtain during Passover and lets us know, and it's the fifth point at the top of page 45. It says, we will be saved by the blood of an unblemished lamb. There's something that's going to happen. It may be in 10 years, it may be in thousands of years, but God is letting us know that there's got something that's going to have something to do with blood, and it's going to have something to do with an unblemished lamb, and it's going to somehow solve this problem with a divided relationship between us and God. To me, that was encouraging. I think he was just throwing us some encouragement there, saying, hey, it's coming. It's coming. There's a solution coming. Okay. And hang in there and be encouraged. So, when I saw that, I was like, yeah, okay, that's great. That's wonderful storytelling to foreshadow, to help you to keep reading, to see how this is going to turn out. So I love to see that. Now, the central idea, before we leave our time today, let me reinforce. We talked about a lot of things, but the central idea of this part of the story is that God demonstrates how he provides for and protects his people. In the lower story, it looks like it's up and down. We're in slavery. We get delivered. That's great. But in the upper story, God is working on a plan, and he's moving it forward using how he protects and how he provides for his people. The central character, God, loves his people, and it's almost to the point where no matter how they act, he has grace and mercy on them, and he's moving the plan forward, and that should be encouraging. That should be encouraging to us. So good discussion today, very good questions for your personal time in preparation for next week. Take a look at starting on page 47, pages 47 to 51 in your study guide is your personal time where we're going to move forward in the story to session 5, talking about new commands and a new covenant. God is going to up the ante here. He's going to do something, quote, new, and formalize this relationship with the people of Israel. And we'll see how he does this. And there are major revelations about his character when he does this. When we actually covenants with a group of people, he is revealing some major facets of his character. And let's see if we can find those. Any last minute comments or questions before we start to
The
end?
question,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
The question was asked about when did God first become a provider, and I found that is in Genesis 22, and it is during the time that he had he told a story of Abraham where he took his son out and laid him up, and he will provide. That was the first he became a provider. So
okay, does it use that Hebrew word? And I cannot remember that Hebrew.
yeah, Jireh.
Jehovah Jireh.
Jireh, my provider. And you're saying, Carrie, that's the first time that is used in the.
Right. I looked it up, and that's what it said.
Yep.
About.
Right.
It said, God, when Abraham and Sarah were old, wait a minute, no, I missed that. Wait, I went past that one. It says, we read the story of Abraham being commanded by God to take his son Isaac to Mount Moriah and sacrifice him. Isaac was the son of promise and miraculous gift from God. When Abraham and Sarah were old, he was a promised child, and God promised to make him a great. He was God's provision. So it seemed until God said to him, lay him on the altar, but it said that was the first time.
Okay, that was Genesis 22.
God, Jireh.
Right. Oh, okay. You sound like the sister of a preacher.
All right now.
Technology.
Very good. Denise, did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thanks, Carrie.
Very good.
You're welcome.
Carrie, we both owe you.
Okay, good. Well, I just thought, we'd get it out so we didn't have to wait. You might have forgot about it.
Hey, Carrie, remember Denise got food.
Yeah, I know we all going over. We just got to know the day.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Carrie. Thank you. Any other quick comments or questions? All right, our live students, hang tight for just a second. I am going to say goodbye to our recording students. Thank you so much for hanging in there, being with us, and being a part of us. And if you like it, give us a thumbs up on YouTube, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.